In this video, I'm going to showcase how to use materials and material functions to style and animate your UI element, as opposed to doing everything inside of user widgets and user widget blueprints. So here in my main menu, I just created these main menu buttons, and these use UI materials and some material functions that I created to shape them, style them, and animate them. So this hover effect and the click effect is all animated entirely in the material and just triggered from the UI widget blueprint. And I'll show you how I do that. So here's my main menu user widget, and I have 4 different of these main menu dither buttons that I created, and each of these buttons looks like this, and it's simply go to the parent here. So this is the parent widget for these UI menu buttons, and it's just a button with a border and then a content slot for any kind of text you want to show on the button or icons or anything like that. The background is what has our material applied to it. And I set that up on pre-construct. I create a dynamic material instance and then set that as the material for the background element. And then the only other functionality in this widget is to handle the button pressing and hover events, which then simply set material properties inside of our animated material. So for instance, on hovered, we set the current time to start time hovered inside of the material. And the current time is a little helper function I made, which uses this get accurate real time node. This node is super helpful because it handles the time differences between a ship build and also running in the editor. So the functionality is the same between the two. And then likewise for get pressed, I just start time pressed, I pass in that current time. And then to undo the animation or play the animation in reverse, for instance, on unhovered, we pass in the negative start time value. And I'll show you what that looks like inside of the material. So here is our button material, and this material uses some material functions and then has a bunch of properties for things like what the texture you want to show when the material is focused. That's what I do for the hover effect. And then I also have 2 shaping textures for idle and focus. And then I have this button offset position material function. Inside of this material function, I simply animate between 2 pixel offset values. And the properties that you can set are the duration for the animation and how much of the pixel offset to apply. And then the start time is what triggers the pixel offset animation to run. And this material function animate in and out, I use anywhere I need to lerp a value from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0 inside of the material. This is what powers the actual animation inside of the material. So inside of the animate in and out material function, I created this algorithm that allows you to lerp from 0 to 1 in any duration seconds that you set. So you can set the duration, and then when you set the start time, it will lerp from 0 to 1, and if you set the start time to -1, it'll lerp from 1 to 0. So this is how I can animate both in and out type of animations, like a fade in and a fade out. Any animation you want to play, and then also play in reverse. So going back to our button material, another material function that I make use of is this dither animate styles. And this I was inspired by a video I saw from Unreal Fest 2022, where they went over material functions and using UI materials to do things like animation, which is what inspired this video to begin with, because I learned a lot of cool tips in that video. I'll link it below. But this material function creates a number of different animations you'd expect for things like buttons or anything you might interact with a cursor. So in this case, I have a hovered, focus, pressed, disabled, and idle set of colors that you can configure. And then I lerp them in and out based on these animations. So your disabled, pressed, focused, and hovered states can all be animated in and out of. And each one has its own duration parameter. And then each one goes into that same animate in and out material function to do the lerping from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0. So that's what this does. I get those colors from those animated states. I dither them, and I like to do 2 of these dither temporal nodes because it creates a cooler effect, I think, than a single one. And then I also blend it with these textures based on the state, and I have this focus alpha reroute node, which is coming out of that offset position output, which if you look at this again, you can see that I'm outputting in the X channel the X position of the offset, the Y channel is the Y position of the offset, but then the Z channel is the actual alpha value of the animation itself, which is just a convenient way I stuffed in an extra parameter into this output vector. And that's it. So from here we can go and create a material instance. So here's the material instance for my main menu button. I set the colors of all those different animated states of the button. And then I don't edit the default opacity mask, but if you want a different shape or a different focus texture, you can just edit these. And then also for all those animation durations, you can edit inside of here as well. And that's it. Not too complicated, just a couple techniques that I didn't know until I recently learned that animating in materials was even really an option. I never really thought about it. I've always used the widget blueprint to do animations, and I still do once in a while when it's convenient. For instance, I have this effect that I use in one of my, well, I use it in a few places, but I use it also when I'm playing like a cutscene. So I have this effect and I want to be able to control it from the level sequencer. So I have a number of animations to be able to fade in and out text on top, for instance, for dialogue, or fade in the whole effect, the whole widget in and out. So I do that just by calling these events from my level sequencer on this widget, which just passes through and plays animations, and then these animations in turn set these properties on the widget to do this animation. So instead of doing this for everything, now I use these materials. So now instead of doing this kind of animation everywhere for UI, I'm using more in material animations thanks to this material function I made. And if anyone has any good ideas on how to improve this or any alternative methods of animating inside of a material, I'd be very curious to know what you came up with, because I just came up with this off the top of my head after experimenting for a while, and it's not too instruction heavy, but maybe there's better ways to do it. So also, I guess I could show a few other materials. So here's that effect that I use in my cutscenes, but this is pretty simple. I just pan a texture left and right, or rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise to create this kind of ethereal instead of just obviously rotating one direction. And then I add them, divide them in half, saturate it, multiply that with this dither control, which is creating this radial cutoff here. So you can change the radius to get a different amount of that radial cutoff. And then you can also, I have this exponential, which does a few things depending what your values are, but I can also edit that cutoff, that radial cutoff from the center. Or if you have no radial cutoff, it can do some other interesting things with increasing the amount of dithered effect, or basically this is translucency, right? Because the more dithered it is, the more translucent it'll be. So yeah, that's how this all works. Also, I guess I should point out this radial exponential node, very useful for converting into radial coordinates, and sometimes you have to offset it a little differently, but here I just do that, multiply it, take the inverse of it so I can fade out the center, and then multiply it by my dithering controls. Again, I'm using that double dither temporal nodes, and then I have a dither amount control also if you don't want any dithering. So that's pretty useful, different effects. And then I multiply these two controls together, do a little fine tuning, and then I have an overall effect strength control here too, which is just another fine tune that you can do inside of a material instance. And that's it. So that gets applied to the background on this widget here. And that's how I do this whole kind of cutscene effect, which I can show. So here's that dithered radial effect in action during my intro cutscene, being played by level sequencer. And the fade in and out and the text fade in and out, it's all controlled from level sequencer to the widget blueprint like I showed before. And that's it. So yeah, materials and material functions, super useful when building a UI. You don't have to do everything inside of the widget. In fact, I really recommend thinking about how you can style and animate your UI elements from within materials themselves instead of all inside of the widget blueprint. Not only can you do it, but it's also potentially a performance booster, since it will offload that animation work to your GPU instead of the CPU. Which, if you're CPU bound, which typically can be in a game, that can be a performance booster as well. Also, just being able to do some other cool effects more easily inside the material, styling wise, and using shader math and stuff like that to generate shapes or effects can be a lot easier than doing it inside of the widgets themselves. So thanks for watching. Hope it was useful. Maybe you learned something, or at least hopefully I showed you some interesting ways of using materials and material functions to style and animate your UI elements instead of doing everything inside of widgets and widget blueprints. So if you did find it useful, give me a like, give me a subscribe. I'll be back with more content as I continue to develop my PvP indie solo game, WarSpawn, and learn new things in Unreal Engine and share them with all of you.